You are now listening to Asking for a Friend with TalkDoc, sharing insights through real, honest, and practical ways to improve your communication and relationships. Featuring your hosts, Dr. Pamela Kreiser, Meredith Edwards Nagel, and Teighlor Polendo.
We are jumping back into a 3-part series reviewing the book that was published in 2021 by Brené Brown, Atlas of the Heart. What's great about this series is that 2 of us ganged up on one and decided one should do a review of a certain chapter. So right now, you're going to listen to Teighlor go through chapter 9 of Atlas of the Heart by Brené Brown.
This one happens to be about the places we go when we search for connection. And the topics are belonging, fitting in, connection, disconnection, insecurity, invisibility, and loneliness. So Teighlor, this one struck a chord with me regarding you because I have always felt that you have valued connection, but you also have a very strong sense of self and not wanting to not be yourself. So you're very willing to accept love and give love. And the other thing that I would say is you're fiercely loyal, extremely loyal.
Mm-hmm.
And I think connection is the beginning of loyalty. I think the first step of loyalty is connection. So let me also throw a quote in here from the chapter.
Okay.
Brené Brown says, belonging is a practice that requires us to be vulnerable, get uncomfortable, and learn how to be present with people without sacrificing who we are.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that last part, not sacrificing who we are, but still finding connection somehow. So I'll pay you a compliment. I've seen you in the last, I've known you many years, more than 10 years, but I've seen you embrace people that way as well, where you've had connection with them and accepted them for the way they were without making them compromise who they are to be in a relationship with you.
I love that we pulled similar quotes from this chapter.
Nice.
So I feel like raising a family and getting lost in the sauce, if you will, is something
like
you're
that.
super honest about. And a lot of moms are afraid to admit. And it makes me just so proud to have you as a friend and to learn from you in this stage of life. And the quote that I pulled, which is very similar, Brené Brown says in this chapter, true belonging doesn't require you to change who you are. It requires you to be who you are. And in all the stages of knowing you for over a decade, you are exactly where you are every time with like full force. And I'm just excited to learn from you right now. Yeah.
Okay. What is your response to all of this, Teighlor?
Yeah, oh my goodness. Okay, I think initially when I hear you guys say that, I'm very touched and honored because getting this chapter and looking at it, oh my God, just all the things I'm so insecure about. But maybe that's why I try so hard in some of these areas because it is really a value to me and I don't always feel that way. So I try really hard in these areas because I do value giving that to other people. It brought me back to a few things we learned from you in college. You remember when you had us do strength finders?
Uh-huh.
So strength finders, I found out one of my strengths is a relator. And I remember it said, when you learn this about yourself, you might connect that people have always come and felt very comfortable sharing things with you.
Uh-huh.
And you'll ask yourself, like, why is my nail stylist telling me about their miscarriages and all these like deep, dark fears? And I've had that happen to me so many times, or just a random person. And so I was like, okay, a strength in relator. The weakness in relator is that we are not great storytellers because we feel like we have to share everything. We share all these boring details. And I'm sure if you listen to this podcast, you're like, yeah, that's her. Because I feel like I'm lying to you if I do not share all these things.
And that is why we edit the podcast.
Yeah, that's why we edit it. But it's hard with the fitting in, like the belonging and the fitting in, even though it's a strength, I feel like it's a weakness of sharing too much.
You don't share too much, though. You don't.
I don't share too much, but in trying to connect, and we can dive into that. So this chapter, it struck some chords.
Yeah.
The part that really stuck out to me is the belonging.
Okay.
So going back to college, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And if you don't know what that is, picture a triangle. At the base, it's your physiological needs. So that's your food, water, shelter, right? And then on top of that is safety and security. On top of that is love and belonging. So built in this pyramid of what you need to survive, essentially, right?
You satisfy the needs as you go up. So your basic need first and then your next.
And they seem to build on each other. So if you don't have food and shelter, then you can't really feel safe and secure. And then you don't feel like you are loved and belong. And then on top of that is self-esteem and self-actualization. So when you look at other people, sometimes I feel like judgmental and you're like, man, why are they so unaware? But you don't really know. Maybe they're just trying to get food on the table. They don't have the luxury of even becoming self-aware of, oh, let me see what these childhood traumas are all about. And let me work on myself to become this excellent communicator, when they literally are just trying to get the basic food, water, shelter.
Yeah.
Even the fact that we get to talk about this and try to look in our life and see how we can improve or how we feel like we're belonging is a luxury. It's an important thing, but just don't be too judgmental of the others around you when they're like, wow, they're so unaware. Or why haven't they done the work?
I talk about this a little bit in my conflict resolution class, where sometimes we'll get into conflicts with people because we've dismissed their story. Just like you're talking about, where we're like, oh, I didn't care to find out about you. And I didn't find out that you're basically just trying to keep it together. You don't have any extra to go into love and belonging. You're just doing safety. Sometimes we don't give each other enough room for the history we bring to that interaction. Because sometimes people will say, why aren't they just better communicators? Or why aren't they this or that? And that's pretty luxurious position to be asking why everyone's not rich in communication skills.
Yeah.
Maybe they didn't have that background.
Yeah.
And maybe they didn't have the lessons.
Because some people, I think, start with the first three already met. They had food, water, shelter. They felt safe and secure, and they love and belong in their family. And those three things are just the foundation of their life. So going to self-esteem and self-actualization, that's not that far of a step for them. But if the other people are still on, we're just trying to get food and water and something over our heads. Yeah. My grandma always said, you never know until you walk a day in their shoes.
Yeah.
Brené Brown says that it's essential because we're a social species and that we can't survive without one another. This great question of why are we on this planet? I remember in school, they said the purpose of us being here is for relationship. It's to connect with each other. And she says love and belonging are irreducible needs for all people. And in the absence of these experiences, there's always suffering. If we don't have the love and belonging, we're in pain. But I love the distinction between belonging and fitting in. Belonging does not require you to change who you are, but it demands that you're accepted for who you are, versus fitting in. It's really when you're just accepted because you're going along with what everyone else is doing. And you talked about betraying yourself. I really had an existential crisis this week because I'm like, oh my God, who am I? Because I started to look at all my relationships and ask myself, am I my true self in all of those relationships? And the answer is no. It's a select few that I truly feel like I can share what I think and feel. There's certain people that I can be that vulnerable with. And it requires vulnerability, which is fucking hard, right? We know that's hard. But if you can't ever truly belong if we're betraying ourselves, our ideals, or our values in the process. So it's not just going along with the flow. It's a practice that requires us to be vulnerable, get uncomfortable, and learn how to be present with people without sacrificing who we are. Because if we sacrifice those values, then we're separate from ourselves and we feel disconnected from ourselves and others. So if you're betraying yourself, you're just trying to fit in. You're not belonging. But belonging is this core value we all need. Otherwise, we're in suffering. And I don't know, it just feels like a very select few that you can share every thought, not every thought, say,
well, you
because
can be yourself. I don't know that you share everything.
If you don't have that vulnerability or that safety net of those people that you can be your true self with, then you're really not belonging.
Yeah.
I guess my question is, how do you know who you are then? Because that's ultimately, if you don't know who you are, you can't be yourself fully around those people and you cannot belong.
So I return your question with question.
Wow.
Minimal observation.
Okay.
Do you find yourself, Teighlor, because you have very vastly different relationships with people that I observe.
Yes.
Communities.
Very different friends.
Do you find that in these relationships, you work hard to make sure they feel they belong with you, but you are now in a position in your life, especially with the busyness of your life that you're at and the stage and everything, really being selective and saying, who do I belong with and who do I want to belong with?
Yeah, it's interesting because I wouldn't say that I don't belong with them. I don't look at it that way, but I do feel like it's a feeling of not belonging. It's not that I'm out of place with them necessarily, but I think I do try to offer this space of letting them say whatever they think and believe, and that I'm open to receive everything, and I don't have to agree. I can just hear it. I don't think I need to place a judgment. It's just I can create that space for them to share. And I think I do them the disservice of not doing the same. But I do feel that because I know how they think and feel and believe, that I would not be welcome. So I edit myself.
Yeah.
So there are certain people that I feel like are incredibly vulnerable, and there's just something about them. Meredith, you're one of those people. Like, I literally was counting on my hand which one of my friends. I know that they don't agree with everything I say, but I can still say it. Dr. K, as much as I love you, you're not that person, because I will always be trying to impress you, because I don't view you as a peer. You're my mentor. You're my professor. You're Aunt K. In my head, you're always above, and I will always want to be learning from you. And I just look at you as so far above me. So it's
goodness.
I feel like I can't.
So much older.
I feel like that's been the beauty.
Thing.
That's been the beauty of doing this thing together, though.
Yeah,
I would 1,000% agree with what you just said about her, minus the last couple of years of doing this.
How am I getting beat up on her episode where we're going to beat up on her?
I'm not a huge compliment.
I just complimented you.
I know.
No, it's a compliment. Even though you're ruthless with me sometimes.
No.
But I don't feel like I can't be vulnerable. That's not what I'm saying. Because I do. Yeah. We come to you, obviously, and you help us. So it's not that aspect, but I guess it's the peer level. I don't think of you as lowly as
me.
I'll bring Meredith down to my level.
I don't think of you as lowly as I think of Meredith. Wow. Okay.
Oh, okay.
So, but so let's get into that peer thing, though. So it sounds like you're providing a pathway of connection for people, but not necessarily getting it from that same person.
Yes. And maybe it's on me that I don't take the risk, because I've made up in my head that they can't hold that space for me.
But I also might be realistic.
I think it is realistic. Totally, I'm going to be honest. I really do. I was asking my husband, he's, no, you need to edit around that person. You need to edit around this. And I was like, yeah, that's how I feel.
Yeah. But that's, I think, an interesting observation in all of this. This is not saying you have to be belonging and connected with every person in your life.
Right.
It's simply saying how it works. Because what you just said about editing around certain people, that's self-preservation.
Yes.
That could be conflict resolution in a family between certain parties that just are not going to get there. There's a lot of things that could be. And this is something that I don't say that often, but I don't think we should say everything we think.
Yeah.
I don't think we should respond to everything that people say to us.
Yeah.
And I don't think that we should necessarily get into these vulnerable discussions with people who aren't careful with their speaking turns.
Yeah.
Because they cause damage and they cause hurt and other sorts of chaos around them.
In relationships, you have to ask yourself a lot of times, is this serving me? And I think that goes with boundaries, like what's good for you.
Yeah.
And just knowing that about yourself.
So you can't really know what you're sacrificing if you're unfamiliar with self.
Yeah. And I think that when we get to all these issues in life, it's from a lack of knowing yourself. And that is what I now am trying to think as I raise 3 men to instill in them. Sometimes I think I've got this. I know who I am. There's aspects of me that it's always changing. I always want to be growing, but I know who my core is. But then when I try to go to explain that to them, oh man, I have no fucking clue.
You had to figure out all your relationships this week.
Yeah.
It was that.
But I think that's what's great. You're authentic in that process, though, Teighlor.
Yeah.
And maybe that's what's hard and why we can be okay with editing ourselves, because some people can't handle that type of authentic connection.
Brené says, connection is the energy that exists between people when they feel seen, heard, and valued, and they give and receive without judgment and derive sustenance and strength from the relationship.
Yeah.
But I think the key there is giving and receiving without judgment. Do you think that is one of our main problems in this landscape in our world, is that so many people are editing themselves that we're not really connecting and hearing each other?
Yes.
Because people are editing their political beliefs, their religious beliefs, their opinions on you name it. people edit a lot. And I think we all feel the pressure of that in certain settings, whether that be work or family or with a particular person. And unfortunately, that costs us the connection because we're editing ourselves. So we're not actually saying what we value at all.
Because we've gotten to a place in culture, and you hear the word cancel culture, you cannot make a mistake and own up for it and grow and apologize, something that is fundamental to development or being a productive person, because we are all going to make the mistake. And so you have to be able to own up for your mistakes, grow and change and move forward. But if you just get canceled, you say one bad thing and you get caught, you're just done. Then you can't risk anything. You can't say anything really worth saying. You can just ruffle no feathers, but are you really going to make deep connections and relate or empathize? All of those things are messy. But I think we've cut ourselves out of a lot of connection because we're too afraid to actually be vulnerable, because you can't be really.
So cancel culture is you have to fit in. And that fitting in is the thing she keeps saying, the killer of the belonging, right?
Yeah. Just being accepted by the group. That's just fitting in. That kind of creates these insecurity, invisibility, and loneliness. And that it's the most painful if it's in your family. That if you don't feel like you can be yourself accepted by your family, you're insecure, and then it creates this need to be invisible, which then it creates a cycle of disconnection and loneliness. And then looking at what loneliness does physically has an incredible health cost to you.
Yeah. The very end of the chapter, the researchers identify life threats.
Yeah.
How threatening it is to your lifespan, essentially.
Yes.
So living with pollution has a 5% added risk, obesity, a 20% added risk, excessive drinking, a 30% added risk, loneliness, a 45% added risk.
Yeah. And I would think that loneliness goes hand in hand with those other things.
Sure. Yeah, it's pretty interesting to see the hard data there on that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about disconnection for a minute. Brené talks about what she says are serious watchouts. Be careful about these two things. Watch out for these. She says there's two of them that are really ways we can become disconnected. One is avoiding pain and vulnerability, and the other is perfectionism. So let's talk about both of those. Avoiding pain and vulnerability is we hide out and pretend we don't need anyone, or we withhold a bid for connection and then blame someone for not responding or reaching out to us. So I don't want to have pain, so I'm going to not even risk it. I'm just going to play it safe. And then if I play it safe, at least you won't hurt me.
Yeah.
And then the second one is perfectionism. I did not expect to see it there and say perfectionism causes disconnection. She talks about it showing up and then it pushes people out of the way because it's a fitting in a different way. I have to make it perfect, or I have to follow all the fit in things that make that perfect life look so perfect. And that fosters disconnection as well. So Teighlor, my question for you is which of the two would be the one you would struggle with more? The avoiding pain and vulnerability or the perfectionism?
Yeah. I think it's definitely perfectionism. On one hand, I can so easily say, oh, nothing's perfect. I don't think that I can make something perfect. But on the other hand, I feel like I am trying so hard to. And I'm not really sure what that is. I know I'm not going to attain perfection, but I think it is honestly insecurity and just trying to close any gap of anyone being able to judge me.
And I did not predict your answer at all. I thought you'd pick the other one.
Oh, really? Yeah, but I'm
because I don't see you as a perfectionist.
No, I'm not a perfectionist because I know nothing will be perfect, but I am always trying to be the most productive or the best of what is a possibility.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Like I just hosted an event this weekend and I went into it already. There's just this thing sucks. Like I can't, it just sucks. And I'm trying to do it on my own. But I don't know why. And every compliment I receive, I just, no, that's not true. Doesn't matter what you say. It just was awful. Didn't matter what I did. It was going to be awful. And I was like, man, have we learned nothing?
That's funny.
I don't know. Okay. What about you guys?
If I were to do which of the watchouts would be a bigger concern for Pamela, it would be avoiding pain and vulnerability. Just trying to stay comfortable in the moment.
Yeah.
It's like a mathematical problem, and I do like to bring in numbers whenever I can into this, especially for you, Meredith. So if you want to grab your calculator, go ahead.
Got it.
Okay. You always have it with you. I know.
Always.
And yeah, the scientific one. So I think there's math. And we would want to probably also say there's sometimes when we can't make the math work because we're just not emotionally ready to do it. So I don't think we want to make the case for you always have to be vulnerable. You always have to be this or that. I think it is a mathematical problem sometimes and say, do I have the bandwidth for this? Or can I tolerate the risk that this might bring to the relationship if I say what I really think?
That's huge. Can you say that again? That solidified this understanding for me.
Yeah. Do I have the bandwidth to tolerate the risk that might come from saying this thing? Am I going to be able to say this thing that's really truly my thought or my feeling or my value and have the emotional energy to manage the risky thing I just did?
Mm-hmm.
That's, I think, a math problem because I don't know that we could advocate that's always going to go one way. I think there are times when we say, you know what, today I'm not going to be able to take that risk, or it's not the right person or not the right moment or not the right time. I have to be good to myself and be careful about what that means. And sometimes the relationship can't handle it too.
Yeah.
So you might say, oh, I thought we were connecting and maybe you weren't really connecting. So then you thought there was acceptance and maybe said the thing, maybe you've been in this situation, said the value or said the idea, and then found out it wasn't going to be tolerated. And that perhaps you would risk the connection overall.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like I'll try for vulnerability and then instantly regret it. And like I feel like I share too much a lot of times. And I'm always like, I wish I could just put that back in. Just don't talk. It's safer. It's safer to not talk.
It is safer to not talk for sure. But it's dangerous in a different way. But
yeah.
Yeah.
Is it? I think it appears safer. Yeah.
I think so. But you're talking about the vulnerability hangover where we share and then we regret that. But the other thing that I would point out there, that's not the only thing happening that you overshared. That might be true. It's not that you shouldn't have shared your true self. It's that this context can't handle that today.
Yeah.
But what you're saying is then you risk the connection ending. And I like that she says, if you don't do that, if you don't risk the connection and be true to yourself in these deep relationships, she says, and I quote, it's a recipe for loneliness.
No, I completely get that, but I'm going to overlay another Brené Brown concept on top of this that'll, I think, clarify it.
Okay.
So do you remember how she has the concept she calls the move the body friend?
I love this one.
Okay, so let's just go over this.
Love it.
She says, I hope that all of us in our lives will have one or two people she calls move the body friend. Now, obviously, it's a joke. It's not meant to really move the body. But this would be the friend when all else is lost and you've accidentally killed someone. Who do you call? And their first response is just give me an address. Like, I'm your loyal friend. It doesn't matter what you say, what you've done. I'm the move the body friend. We'll talk about the details later. Just give me the address. And she talks about that as a joking way, but just to say, I hope that for everybody that you have a couple of those that are really deep. Now, that's where I would overlay on this topic and say, I think that when you have the move the body friend, there is enough runway for you to truly be yourself. But we would also observe there are people who are not move the body friends.
Yeah. There shouldn't be many of those people.
Do not have the commitment and they cannot handle that level of vulnerability. So I agree with the point that we want to have these long, great relationships, connection, vulnerability, all that. But I do think in specific contexts. And I don't think it's realistic to be close with everyone. I think it's realistic to pick that circle out and invest in it, which is what I think she's saying here.
Yes.
Yes.
To the extent, Teighlor, that you just said you've been in some situations where maybe you've shared and then found out it can't hold that. While it didn't have comfort, while it was uncomfortable, you learned that's not a move the body friend, though.
Yeah.
As much as that's painful.
Yeah.
But you got data, really good data right there that said, oh, so this would be a mistake for me to invest too much of my own values and vulnerability in because this relationship can't hold the weight of that. But it doesn't mean necessarily you overshared. It means the relationship is the flaw, not you sharing too much.
Oh my gosh.
Notice the difference.
100%.
Yeah.
That's
So
why
it's
relationships
not that you made the
fail.
mistake of sharing your true self. It was that you found out the relationship wasn't sturdy enough. But that's actually not a mistake on you.
I think ultimately it breeds disconnection. It feels different than you were hoping, maybe didn't bring you closer. But then I put that relationship as a little bit shallow. I take a step back and I'm like, oh, okay, it's not as close as I thought it was or wanted it to be. And so it's a little bit hard to accept. Sometimes you could have been at a place where maybe it handled that, and then circumstances in life change and you're like, oh, we're not there anymore. It's hard to take sometimes.
Hard to accept and hard to see that's the reality of where we are today.
Yeah.
So Teighlor, if you were to summarize what are some ways that we can cultivate connection, what would you say comes from the chapter just to leave us with?
There's some things you can do, such as active listening, practicing empathy and vulnerability. Not easy things by any means. But when you can understand someone's perspective or listen and not plan your response, sometimes you hear someone say something, ask again, would you repeat that? I'd really like to understand what you're saying. I think, Meredith, you've told us that as ways to build connection.
Yeah.
That's the whole point of all of this, is we want to build connection rather than have distance and disconnection. So,
yeah, I think then the takeaway that I would leave us with is, as you're surveying the different relationships and saying, who are those closer people that I want my inner circle, and maybe doing some of those things more intentionally and saying, I'm going to choose vulnerability once in a while to make those connections deeper, because that's the circle I want to build. Yeah. And those are the relationships that can handle that kind of a risk. And maybe being more intentional, because that's something I think a lot of people don't think about. They think, oh, I'm just going to work on myself and it'll translate to all my relationships. And I would actually not suggest that. I would suggest that you building your inner circle is far more worthy of your time and effort. And the far out people that we don't even know that we're trying to impress, a big waste of our time.
Yeah, I like that. I think when you do that, then ultimately those types of relationships will help you grow as an individual. Yeah. So ultimately you'll get to both places, but they'll take you along the journey versus just doing it all on your own and then saying, oh yeah, I need to have connection in my life. Let me go work on that separate thing.
Yeah. Once again, thank you for joining us today. Please remember to rate, share, and subscribe to our podcast. And thank you for listening to Asking for a Friend.
Let us know what you thought of the episode. Our email is hello@afafpodcast.com. This show is for educational purposes only and is copyrighted. Written permission must be granted before syndication or rebroadcasting. Thanks for listening to Asking for a Friend with TalkDoc.